Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Michael Roth. Let's get nerdy.
This episode is sponsored by the Jed Mahonis Group, your partner for expert iOS, Android, and Rails development. We've been working on some really fun mobile apps lately with companies like PubPass and InSupply here in the Twin Cities, as well as our neighbors in South Dakota working on something for MarketBeat. Sign up for our monthly newsletter to learn more about what's launching next at jmg.mn/news.
Hey, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. So you and I had the pleasure of meeting at a Popup Think Tank event earlier this summer, which was kind of focused around community and relationships. And between now and then, I had a little bit of a chance to read up on your journey to Popup Think Tank. I know back in 2012, you had founded a church that was also kind of focused around relationships and people. And then 2016 came around and Popup Think Tank was born in a part-time fashion that evolved to what it is now. I'd love to hear how the experience founding the church and your professional life in general led to Popup Think Tank.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on, Michael. And thanks to Rob and Tim and Jenny and everyone over at JMG and the Constant Variables podcast. Love what you guys do and love the invitation and being here with you all for this episode. Thanks so much for asking about my background. Yeah, in 2012, we started a church of all things, like you do. We're here in Minneapolis. We're bootstrapping it. It was a small group of us. We wanted to reinvent what it meant to gather to talk about faith and life and everything in between. And it was a small group of us. And we didn't really have many resources, but we had a lot of imagination, and we had some really great questions. One of those questions was, do we even matter to our community?
Yeah.
and asking that question can be really confronting for a faith community. But we took a good hard look at it, and we asked ourselves, if we left this community, Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, would we be missed? And we came to the conclusion, no, but that's not such a bad thing. And we started to experiment with an event that we called at the time we called it a friend raiser. And we'd host these 2-hour brainstorming events where we would invite a friend of ours from another community or from our city who's starting an after-school program or a social enterprise or a nonprofit. And we would make a deal with them. We would say, hey, you invite your crew, your network for an evening, and we'll invite all our people, and let's crash it all together for an evening. And we're going to interview you and then get people into groups and ask them to brainstorm ideas that can take your whole thing to the next level. The long story short is this became what our community was known for. These friend raiser events. And so a waiting list started to generate. And we were, every other week we were hosting one of these friend raiser events. And before long, somebody, in the spirit of asking ourselves good questions, somebody said, are we even a church anymore? and it kind of is a sense where I was like, actually, I don't know that we are a quote unquote church anymore. We do these friend raiser events. They're going really well. Let's double down on these. So we shut down the church with the blessings of our elder board. And we reincorporated as a small nonprofit or a small for-profit. We went to trademark the name Friend Raiser, but that was already taken. So we had to rebrand. And, you think rebranding will take 10 minutes. It actually takes 10 months. But we came up with Popup Think Tank and have been doing these brainstorming events for startups, nonprofits to tech startups for the last 10 or so years. And it's just been an incredible journey.
That's awesome. It sounds like a very organic transition and organic need there from the church into Popup Think Tank, and not really kind of a hard quit and a new idea beginning. Right.
It's a constant evolution and iteration. Looking back, you can connect the dots. I could never have predicted it. It was funny because we did a brainstorming to come up with a new name for the friend raiser. And it was actually a pastor friend of mine who said, hey, what about a pop-up think tank? So I quickly Googled it. Nobody had it. The domain was for sale. We did a little negotiation, but that's just one small aspect of what it means to pivot. It's been fun. And I've been fortunate to do a lot of entrepreneurial like things along the way. And so the value that I can bring to founders has only increased with these events that we can do. Then also just a really great set of experiences with these amazing founders that I've worked with over the years.
Absolutely. And that core idea of do we matter to the community is such a key for entrepreneurs as well, because stopping to think if your buyer group actually wants the product that you're working on is essential no matter what you're doing or trying to bring to a community. You have to make sure that you pivot it from your idea to something that's well received.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, there's what people say and then there's what they do. And, people are saying, hey, we really like your community, but then they didn't show up. And I was like, yeah, but that says way more about it. Then we just started asking them for help. We'd say, hey, we need your help. We're hosting this group from so-and-so nonprofit. Would you be willing to come for an evening and hear about what they're up to? And we're not going to ask you for money. It's a friend raiser. We'd like your ideas and your connections. And asking them to add value was in its own sort of way valuable and allowed for us to really craft an identity.
That makes a lot of sense. So at what stage do you normally find yourself working with a founder with Popup Think Tank in the form that it is now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the founders that we fit best with, they have a killer product and a killer team and a killer vision for a market that matters. There's a buyer for it. They're ready to go. They're on the verge of their first revenue. They have taken first revenue and they're starting to get some momentum, right? And they're starting to think about building a community around that product or building a community around their brand because they know they can't do it alone. And they're getting ready for that first push to market and it's looking like it's getting ready for an upswing. That's the profile of founder that we work with. And they're really ready to start leveraging that early success in market and take it all to the next level. And not every founder, but a lot of founders will start to think about doing some kind of event, right? What if we launched this thing with some kind of event? Many founders don't have event planning backgrounds. And so now the question is, am I going to DIY it? Or do I bring on a partner? And what would that event even look like? And so what a pop-up think tank represents or offers is an opportunity to do an event in a way that engages people and engages participants more than just, hear the pitch. It's hear the pitch, hear the interview, but also then contribute ideas and connections and wisdom that they might have to help take that founder and their project to the next level.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So early stage, but kind of a more developed, mature idea. If someone was looking at it with maybe a product that they didn't have fully developed, would it be something to equate to a focus group where they might be able to have one event to get there? Or is it better to fully develop their product, team, and market and then come to you guys?
No, you can never have the right amount of insights too early. And it's never too soon to get in front of a customer and to ask that customer or that user or that client about how they're thinking and feeling and reacting to that either hypothetical product, proposed product, MVP, whatever the case is. It's never too soon to learn from their interactions with it. And so to answer your question, we love it when super early stage founders come to us and they say, we think we have a hunch on a product for this market. But before we go any further, what if we gathered people around our ideas, around the problem that we're seeking to solve, and just asked them straight up, what are you thinking about this? And what would you do with this? And then we just, we work with founders to listen to the music underneath the lyrics, because there's what people say, and then there's sort of the intonation and what's really actually happening here. And that's a really fun process to listen to a market and discern what they're really thinking. And some of the best founders know the problems that their customers are facing better than the customers they themselves know it, and that makes for a really ripe opportunity.
That's awesome. The music underneath the lyrics is a very cool metaphor to kind of line up finding that need, even if, the customer isn't able to articulate it to you, because that's when you can provide the most value.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some key features you guys have found that lead to productive community events? Are there very structured questions and end goals that you have, or is it more open forums?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when I think about a productive community event, there's definitely some inputs. And one of those is to make sure that we have the right people in the room. And this is why founders choose to do a pop-up think tank with us, because they know that anybody who accepts an invitation to something called a pop-up think tank is likely going to be somebody who loves creative thinking, likes to think big and divergently in a space that welcomes big thinking. They're going to be somebody who maybe slightly more extroverted, though introverts do extremely well in our environments. And they're people who like to explore and to connect, and they bring a lot of curiosity and creativity to just about any room they're in. And so people who accept an invitation to a pop-up think tank generally bring that kind of energy. And so as far as like an effective community event, working really hard to make sure that our guest list represents people who are going to feel comfortable there and can add value to that founder and their project. And that could be anybody from potential investors to users to other stakeholders like teammates or potential teammates, community partnerships, strategic partnerships, channel partnerships. And so that's one key feature. And I think, starting with the end in mind is always a good idea. And so for people who are at the event, this is their beginning. For the founder that I'm working with, for them and me, for them and I, the event can feel like the end, but for the people who are there, it's just the beginning. It's the beginning of their journey with that founder potentially. And so we get started right away on that post-event survey. So we can ask people specifically how they want to be involved with that startup, with that founder. And knowing that those survey results are going to be really valuable for that founder. And we just start with that survey. Hey, here's what after the event, we're generating energy at the event. Afterwards, here's the questions that we're going to ask them. Do they have introductions they want to make? Do they have an idea that they generated that they want to actually help implement? Those are all really valuable things to founders. And we start with that. And then lastly, I think the third thing that I would say on like key inputs to a productive community event is understanding that the event doesn't start at the start time. It starts as soon as somebody registers. And the moment they register and they commit some time and energy and they raise their hand and they say, I will be there to listen, to learn, to connect, and to help, that is their beginning. And honoring that time between when they register and when they actually show up at that event, whether it's virtually or in person, that's a really ripe time for educating, honoring them time, saying thank you, saying we're looking forward to having you, and then being really specific about what they can expect. What can they expect for parking? What can they expect to, we've learned that telling people and showing them what to wear, of all things, goes a really long way. People want to know how to dress, and they're going to show up to something that they've never been to. That's just like something we've learned kind of the hard way, or kind of stumbled upon over the years. Like we get really great turnouts when we just tell people, hey, this is a business casual event, but wear whatever you wore to work.
Absolutely. So I mean, being an introvert somewhat myself, not completely. I absolutely love talking to people in a business sense, but the general like going out and going to parties or anything like that was never my scene in college. And the Popup Think Tank event I did was very, very easy to feel like you were in a group of people that were there for the discussion. And it was very open to brainstorming, which was awesome. I can completely understand the focus on people though, because that absolutely leads there. I wonder if it is kind of the end of the journey for you and the founder to get to that event. What kind of things go into figuring out what people will work for a certain founder? Are there certain traits or meetings that you guys go over on the front end?
Are there certain meetings or traits that we go over, like around who's going to come to the event?
Yeah. So like, do you have specific meetings, or do you look for specific maybe buyer personas in the founder's target market that you would pursue? Or kind of how do you build up that idea on what would be a good invite list for a specific founder?
Yeah, I love the question about helping founders discern who is a good fit to invite to the pop-up think tank that is for their startup. And oftentimes, we'll tell them it kind of starts with a list of about 95 to 100 people. And I'll hear a lot of founders who will say, I don't know that many people. Are you kidding me? And we give them our resources and we give them memory joggers and help think through, who to invite. I think about one founder that I worked with last year. Her name's Alyssa. And Alyssa said, there's no way that I know 100 people. I said, well, just get started and let's chat first thing tomorrow. So we connect the first thing the next morning. And she says, I'm at 120 people. What did I do wrong? and I said, as it turns out, most people actually know more people than what they realize. When you think about former colleagues and you think about family and friends, and you think about the clubs and organizations, associations you belong to. And that doesn't even count, like you just go down your LinkedIn profile and the connections you have there. And then one of my favorite hacks for jogging one's memory for thinking through their network is just look over your calendar for the last year and look at the people you've been meeting with. Look at the meetings you've hopped into. Look at the events you've gone to. Over the last 12 to 18 months, there's a really good chance you've met a few dozen, if not close to 100 people. And it really opens up a founder's mind towards, wow, in these 100 people, there's actually maybe more opportunity there than I realized. That these are people that would maybe come to an event if I invited them and asked them for their help. And if they did come to an event and learned about what I'm doing, would they make an introduction? Or do they have an idea that they want to help implement? These are all really valuable nodes in the network, if you will, that can help founders get to the next level. So that's one way that we help founders think through, like, who's a good fit, who in your network, who in your community, who in your audience is a good fit for an event like this.
Yeah. And I love what you said about focusing on potentially them even just making an introduction for you, because as a person starting out in business development, growing that network is the biggest hurdle you have to get over first. And sometimes you only think about it of, does this person want my product? And that's not necessarily everyone you have to talk to. Sometimes they might know a person that could give you great advice about it or would want it themselves. And that step out introduction can be very valuable.
Absolutely. And I think, Michael, what I would add on to that is if I go to an individual with some sort of preconceived thing about what maybe I can get from them or how they can help me, I just have this sense like people can sense that. And they kind of pick up on that. Oh, this person's reaching out because they want a certain thing. And there's a place and a time for that. But there's also, like, in the spirit of curiosity, reaching out because I know you're a fellow human on this earth and you're doing some cool things from what I can observe. And I have no idea if you can help me or if I can help you or if we can be of help to one another or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's immediately next week or maybe it's actually in a year from now. Regardless of all of that, regardless of what transaction may or may not occur, if you want to use that language, in the spirit of connecting out of curiosity and learning from one another almost always goes further in the long run. And I think, inviting somebody to like an event like Popup Think Tank kind of has that posture of, hey, maybe it's been a minute since we've had a chance to connect. But I understand you do work in this area and I would love it if your expertise or your experience was present there. Is an honoring, dignifying way to ignite a relationship.
That's awesome. Absolutely. So in your experience leading multiple think tank events, when you do get all of the right people in the room, are there certain ways you've found to foster better conversation between them?
Yeah. Fostering conversation, whether it's in person or virtually, there's simple things that anybody who's listening to this podcast can engage with and deploy right away. One thing I would say is that the event doesn't start when the event starts. Like I said earlier, the event starts as soon as somebody accepts a meeting invite or is even invited or registers for an event. Honoring that experience starts right there, and you can help shape expectations and help priming their experience with facts, certainty, things to expect. When you walk in the room, here are some things that you might see. Those are things that go a long way in helping people feel comfortable and helping them prepare for whatever is going to happen at that experience. So we've learned right away, when you bring people together to foster conversation, helping them experience a certain level of certainty about what's going to happen, while leaving sufficient room for serendipity or mystery or the things that aren't planned yet but could happen. And that's actually why we need to do the event. Those are things that go a long way as well. And we also, I get asked the question a lot, like, do you do these events virtually? And, I often say we do them in person and we do them virtual. At Popup Think Tank, we don't do hybrid events. They don't tend to work that well. But when it comes to online events, certain things like helping people create the expectation that, hey, we'd love it if your cameras could be on, expect to contribute. If you can minimize distractions by closing browser windows or being in a physical environment where there's less distractions, that sets the expectation for how people can participate. And I'm always a big fan of starting and ending on time to honor an individual's participation at an event. And I think that can help people. And you give them the reassurance that, hey, we will end on time. Now they know, like, hey, we're in it together. This is the time that it ends. Let's make sure that we're fostering the best conversation that we can in that room. So those are a few things that we've learned along the way about fostering conversation.
Absolutely. And I love that the focus on the front end can be so key, because I think that shares a general business practice of building up that trust with whoever you're interacting with. And that can lead to confidence in the conversation. And that relaxed confidence is, I think, what really leads to the best kind of free-form time in the middle to have fruitful conversations. You mentioned that hybrid doesn't work, virtual and in-person do, though, separately. Is there one that works better than the other? And I'd love to hear more about why you don't find hybrid to work as well.
Hybrid events have the challenge of helping people feel like they're actually part of the process. Usually the pendulum will swing towards one or the other, meaning in-person folks will feel like they'll feel maybe a little bit guilty because they know that the virtual folks aren't getting as much out of it, or there's a barrier there because they're on a computer and we're actually here in person. And it sort of bifurcates to one or the other. And virtual people start to feel a little bit left out. And so that whole dynamic, some environments are set up, and there are definitely rooms that can do the hybrid really well. What we've learned and what we've sort of set out to do is let's just choose one that makes sense. Let's either do it in person or let's do it virtually. And there's trade-offs. If you were to ask me which one do I like better or which one do I think is most effective, I would just tell you yes. They do different things. Virtual events can be snappy and quick, and they transcend time zones. And you can make a Zoom meeting fun if you do simple things like music and breakout rooms, and you keep it moving and you help people understand, like, hey, if you could have your cameras on, that goes a long way. These are things that we've learned. Like, this could be the best Zoom meeting you're on all week, if not all month. They don't all have to be the same sort of Zoomy feel. And so you can do really snappy, fun virtual events where people are meeting new people, and it's relatively quick. And there's definitely some pluses to that. On the other hand, there's just things, and I think most people listening to a podcast like this are going to agree. There's just a certain magic and a dynamic that happens in person that can't happen virtually. That when we can read body language and we can be very mobile with ideas and Post-it notes, and when we can, laughter and getting a sense, and breaking bread together in the same room. These are all like really interesting human dynamics that are really make for in-person events. And I think we're coming to a time now as we ease out of this into this post-pandemic world where we're going to do it virtually unless we can do it in person. But if we're going to do it in person, it's got to be really, really good and really well thought out. And the environment really has to make sense. Because if we're going to fly people in, or if we're going to drive across town, there has to be a reason why that thing couldn't have happened virtually. And so I think what we're going to see is really, really, really good, well-facilitated, well-moderated, well-designed in-person experiences. And I think we're starting to see inklings of that now. And it's just really fun to see those popping up.
Yeah, that's a great point on the competition in-person events face now, with everyone kind of forced to adopt virtual availability at some degree with COVID. It's a tough hurdle to get over. But the two of us met for the first time at one of the virtual events, like we had mentioned earlier, and I was able to take away a huge amount, even for myself, who the event was not focused on what I like to find in the community. I was really glad that you had mentioned the breakout rooms, because those were something I did not know Zoom was capable of. And it makes it so enjoyable for being able to break down a really large call and have everyone be able to say their piece, where when you're missing out on that body language and you've got the lag of a Zoom call, it's sometimes hard to interject without interrupting someone and feeling really awkward. The breakout rooms kind of just bridge that gap enough to make it really, really enjoyable.
Absolutely. I was talking to a founder yesterday, and we were talking about the growth of his company. When I met him a year ago, it was him and 4 co-founders, and they were just getting into market. And then early this year, they raised a seed round, and then they raised a little bit more money this summer, and they've grown now to 26 people. And he was talking about how they're across the country, right? And he's talking about how this size group is just such a whole different animal. And, leading an all hands meeting and presenting an all hands meeting, 5 versus 25 is a completely new thing. And so we were talking about the breakout rooms and talking about how breakout rooms have this really great ability to provide contrast. When you go from a large group setting to, do I even matter here? I'm just taking in information, to a small group where I'm actually seen, I'm heard, I have a voice, and I'm being asked for my thoughts and my perspective. That contrast between the two and that movement from the large group in the Zoom into those breakout settings are really valuable for all participants and all learning styles. And I always feel like most people know that when they voice their opinion or their idea, they know that there's a chance that that idea won't be accepted or it won't be, implemented. But that's actually not the point. We actually know, like, I just need to be heard. I just feel like if I have a perspective, I have a point of view, the value is in the sharing. The value is in the ability to just say my piece and what I'm seeing and feeling from my corner. And I find that breakout rooms and small groups, whether they're 3, 4, 5, 6 people, foster an environment where people really feel like they're heard and they're part of the process.
Absolutely. And the first few times you start to get feedback on one of your weird ideas that leads to someone else having maybe even the end idea, it just reaffirms it, and you're happy to throw whatever spaghetti against the wall will stick.
Absolutely, because the quality of the idea emerges from the quantity, and the quality emerges from the connections between the ideas. And ideas morph, they evolve, they get smaller, they get bigger, they change colors. And pretty soon, the idea at the end of the meeting, the thing that's going to be implemented, it's a combination of a lot of people's perspectives and participants and what they're thinking and feeling. That's actually impossible for anybody to take credit other than the people who were there and who are in the room. It's not any one person's idea. It's that group in that setting came up with this specific thing that's now being implemented. And that's a really beautiful process. It really democratizes idea generation in a really good way. And it creates a spirit of collaboration.
Yeah, I love that, because the person to talk at the end probably wouldn't have had the same sentence if they were the first one to talk.
Exactly.
So if anyone listening here is not necessarily a founder, but getting real excited about the think tank in general, is there any way they could get involved just as a participant?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first thing, Michael, I'd say is, I always say people, you might not be a founder yet. Most people, I think, the idea of founding and starting a new business, I think is on the radar for many people as an option for their career and an option for their personal and professional growth. And so I'd say is you might not be actively founding something new right now, but between now and maybe when you want to go down that path in the future, hanging out with entrepreneurs and in founder ecosystems is a really great way to sharpen skills, build relationships, and discern whether or not that's a path for you. But then there's also people who, they know for sure that's definitely not for them. But they do want to hang out and they do want to contribute and they do want to be a genuine positive presence for founders. So to answer your question, we're over at popupthinktank.com. You can hop on our email list and get event alerts. Not all of our events are public. Sometimes founders like more private things, but we do have a certain number of public events where it is open to those who are paying attention to us on our social channels and elsewhere about events. We do most of our communication actually by email. So hopping on our email list and getting our once a month, twice a month emails is the best way to keep up with what we're doing. And yes, our public events are public. Folks can hop in and participate in whatever way makes sense for how they want to contribute.
Yeah, and I love the idea of kind of keeping that avenue of thought open as someone would be participating, of maybe contributing to their long-term idea that might turn them around to having their own founded idea.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What are your guys' goals in the next year or two growing Popup Think Tank?
There's a couple different ways to answer that question. If you were to ask me about numerical goals for Popup Think Tank and our company, I start to talk about how we're on track to do 40 events for 40 founders in the next 12 to 16 months. And that's a really fun adventure. And I think about being set up to be able to train facilitators and to run the operations in the background to be able to support founders through that journey. That's a lot of fun to think through that. The other way to answer your question, and because I kind of like to nerd out on goal setting stuff, and one of the things that I've found myself saying is, like, as much as building a business is about, pushing and making things happen and staying at it persistently and bringing the grit, I also in no way want to try to make something happen that doesn't want to happen. And I think, for me, and the energy that I bring to my work is so much about finding out what wants to happen. What is our community ready for? What is our ecosystem ready for? And is there energy that's there that's waiting to be released? And if so, can our brand, community, service, platform, whatever you want to call it, be a conduit that actually releases that energy? And so for us at Popup Think Tank, it's about finding that energy and releasing it to where it wants to be released. And so that's why I always talk about founder energy, because founders, individuals, men and women who are in that time of life when they are taking a risk to solve a problem, to create an efficiency, to pursue an opportunity, there's a founder energy there, and it's contagious. And how can we create environments, spaces, events, experiences where people can encounter that energy, learn from it, be inspired by it, and even contribute to it? And can we facilitate that founder energy through our local communities and, dare I even say, global networks? That's worthwhile. And I think there's something there that wants to happen. And so that's, if you were to ask me about goals for Popup Think Tank, 40 over the next 12 to 16 months comes to mind. But also we're on a search to find out what wants to happen.
I absolutely love that. And I can't tell you how much it resonates, because Tim Bornholt, who was the previous host of this podcast, was joking in one of the previous episodes that I had listened to about JMG being some of the best app developers, but worst app salesmen that he knows, because along the same line of thinking, it's never a goal to force an app to happen. If the idea is not there, if the people aren't motivated to be involved, it's not going to happen. It's got to be that just organic, easy relationship that solves the need that's in the market.
Yeah, I think hopefully there's a founder, entrepreneur, participant, community organizer, innovator, somebody out there right now who's been pushing, prodding, pulling, trying to make something happen. And I wonder how their day or their week or their fall of 2022 might be different or healthier if they switch to, let's find out what wants to happen. It can be really freeing. It can be really liberating to switch. And of course, there's always a time for grit and hard work and moving things forward. And so there's two sides of the same coin. But there's always an invitation before us all to look for the thing that is ready for its time.
Absolutely. You've got to be ready to seize the opportunity, but finding it definitely should be natural.
Absolutely, for sure.
So this episode will likely be released right before Twin Cities Startup Week. And as both locals to Minneapolis, I've heard that you are hosting an event. I would love to hear a little bit more about what's going on with that.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me just plug in general Twin Cities Startup Week. This week for me it's like recess for me. The events, the people, the energy, the startups, I can't get enough of it. I'm utterly exhausted at the end of it, and I go home and crash for a weekend, but it's so much fun. And so I would just plug Twin Cities Startup Week. If you are accessing this podcast from somewhere other than the Twin Cities, hey, feel welcome. We have fly-in programs. We have a really easy airport to get in and out of. Pick an event, pick a few events, come stay with us for a few days or even most of the week. We'd love to have you. We are one of the bigger Twin Cities Startup Week events throughout the country, so feel welcome. And if you are here in the Twin Cities or the greater Minnesota area, you literally have no excuses. It's still a few weeks away. let's make sure that you're there. I'm fortunate to have 3 sessions this year. I'm going to do a session called How Story Works on Monday, September 19th. We're going to take over a room in a WeWork in the North Loop, and we're going to unpack narrative architecture and how a story is actually a story. Because many founders are told to tell their story, and then they go out there and they're telling a timeline of events and a sequence of events, and it turns out that's actually not a story. But what we can do is understand simple narrative elements that help tell a story, which is absolutely relevant towards pitching a new business, fundraising, recruiting teammates, and even sales and marketing motions. On Wednesday of that week, we're going to do a pop-up think tank for a mystery founder. So we'll actually reveal the founder in the room. We'll talk about his or her mission, the product that they're building and launching. We'll get everybody up to speed, and then we'll get everybody into groups to contribute ideas to take that to the next level. So I can't tell you who that founder is, but I can tell you that they are an absolutely incredible group of people who have a truly world-changing technology and idea that most people can A, understand, and B, find themselves using relatively quickly. So come check that out. And then on the Saturday to kick it all off, Saturday the 17th, and this is my effort to win the award for longest session title. I'm calling this one You're Necessary and Next, How a Brief History of Everything Will Inspire You to Think Big and Take Action. In parentheses, an introduction to founder energy. So we'll do some fun things on a Saturday morning. We're going to be over at Docks Hall Event Center in St. Louis Park on a Saturday morning, coffee, donuts, and then it's just back the truck up. And I actually build this research-backed model for human growth and development on a large sticky wall, and then we interact with it. And it's truly one of the most enjoyable things that I get to do is that workshop. So if you're listening, come check it out. Twin Cities Startup Week. It's pretty easy to find on Google and other search engines.
That's awesome. And it's yet another just raving review of Twin Cities Startup Week that I've heard between Jenny, Tim Bornholt, and yourself. You guys all 3 have just bubbled at how amazing it is. And I'm so excited to be able to just dive in for a week full of fun, because it'll be my first coming up here. And there's going to be a lot of good opportunities.
Absolutely. It really is fun. It's a blast.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. This may not be the last time we have you on the show. You're around the cities and an expert on quite a few things, so we might have you back from time to time. If anyone's looking to stay connected with you, how should they reach out?
Yeah, we very easily popupthinktank.com with all of the relevant information about how to be in touch. And we look forward to it.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks so much.
Thanks to Tim Schuster for joining the podcast today. You can learn more about Popup Think Tank at popupthinktank.com, and be sure to check out Tim's events at Twin Cities Startup Week, which starts September 17th. If you're looking to learn more about your new host, you can connect with Michael Roth on LinkedIn. Show notes for this episode are at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with any of us here at Constant Variables by sending an email to hello@constantvariables.co, and you can follow us on Twitter at CV_podcast. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and edited by the tasteful Jordan Doust.